Diamond B Sports presents championship drag racing from the National Hot Rod Association, the Big Bud Shootout. Featuring a showdown between 8 of the finest fiberglass-bodied funny cars, driven by 8 of the best drivers in the world. They thread the needle through the quarter mile at speeds topping 260 miles an hour with elapsed times of less than 6 seconds. Welcome to Indianapolis Raceway Park in Indianapolis, Indiana, the largest drag racing facility in the world for the richest drag race in the world, the 3rd annual Big Bud Shootout. It was at the first shootout that Frank Hawley, soon to become world champion and driver of the famed Chi-Town Hustler, defeated one of the true legends of this sport when in the far lane he outran Don Prudhomme for victory. Last year saw Kenny Bernstein, a last-minute qualifier, totally dominate the event, finally subduing Al Segrini for the championship and securing the $25,000 first prize. Again this year, the 8 fastest funny cars in the world, determined through season-long qualifying, will meet to contest for the lion's share of the over $40,000 purse. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave McClellan, and this is the Chi-Town Hustler, sporting a brand new paint job. You know, this is a fiberglass replica of a Dodge Daytona body, and to the racer, the beauty goes more than skin deep. Steve Evans can tell us about it.
Dave, you take the funny car out of its plastic wrapper, as we have done with Billy Meyer's machine, and you discover an animal of a race car. Let's take a tour from front to back. The first thing you'll discover is the chrome weight bar. Now, that is filled with lead shot to help keep the front end down under varying track conditions. Also mounted forward for ballast is the fuel tank. It holds 14 gallons, about 11 of which are used on each run. Appropriately enough, on either side of the fuel tank are the mandatory onboard fire extinguishers. Now, there really is no front suspension on Billy's car. It's solid. On some, you'll find a rocker arm style independent front suspension. Here we have a pair of heavy-duty oil filters, and then we move to the meat of the matter, a fuel-injected, supercharged aluminum Hemi racing engine. No one's really sure how much horsepower they put out because there's not a dyno in the world capable of measuring it. Let's call it 3,000. They do. The exhaust headers really do more than just exhaust. They also furnish some necessary downforce for traction. Moving back to the cockpit area, it's pretty simple as far as race cars go. Billy has a handbrake. Attached to that is the fuel shut-off lever. This lever activates the fire bottles if necessary. This is a shifter. He only moves it once, low to high, about half track. This is the reverser, used only when he backs up after the burnout. And this particular lever and this one are fuel mixture controls. He can richen or lean the motor from the cockpit. Not much upholstery because with a 5-layer fire suit, you're pretty well wearing the necessary padding. The tires are limited to 17 inches across, 114 inches around. This particular little aluminum tank here is really just a breather tank. It collects any oil being blown out of the motor and keeps it off the racetrack. The wheelie bars here are also mandatory. Without them, cars have been known to flip over backwards. I had a chance to talk to some of the racers involved in today's Big Bud Shootout. I asked them if there was a car that they particularly feared. Here's what they said.
I'd have to go with Mark Oswald. It's momentum right now. The car the last month has just been flying. And in fact, he beat us. We run our second quickest run ever a few weeks ago, and he just flat out run us on that in that race. So I'd have to go with Mark Oswald, but in this Big Bud Shootout, everyone's tough.
Well, right now I would have to say it's Mark Oswald and the Candies and Hughes car. They've been running extremely well in the last 60 days. They've picked the pace up and passed all of us. So I would have to say, except for ourselves, which we would always say, they would be the main one.
Well, I don't know. I think there's one car right now that could be a little ahead. The Candies and Hughes car may be a taste, but not much. We're going to chase him down, I hope, but otherwise it's a toss-up.
This is Mark Oswald, the driver they're all talking about, the driver of the dreaded Candies and Hughes car from the bayous of Louisiana. Mark, you seem to be enjoying a bit of an intimidation factor here.
Yeah, right now we are, but when the car runs that good, it's also right on the borderline of going down the racetrack, and it's real hard to keep it that way. We got guys like Frank Hawley yesterday who showed real consistency, and, the car really ran good, so it's not as much an advantage as you might think.
Mark Oswald, the strong favorite and #1 qualifier going into the first round of the Big Bud Shootout. Understand that these drivers have been going through a qualifying procedure throughout the entire year. Based upon their qualifying position at NHRA national events, they earned the points that gave them the right to compete in this $44,000 Big Bud Shootout. In NHRA style racing, the #1 qualifier races #5. #2 races #6. #3 races #7. And here, our first pair of cars, we find Tim Gross, who ended up the #4 qualifier with 1,210 points, racing the #8 qualifier. That is Tom McEwen. He qualified #8, just barely making it into the field with 1,070 points. To give you an idea of how close the field is, only 270 points separated Tom McEwen from Mark Oswald, the #1 qualifier. There's the reason why the qualifying was so close. Look at this race. Tom McEwen in the far lane, just barely pulling ahead of Tim Gross at the finish. His elapsed time, 5.89 seconds. His speed at the finish line, 254 miles an hour. Side by side, both cars launch off the starting line as if they are one. From a standing start, they cover 1,320 feet down this racing surface. Tom McEwen and Tim Gross, each struggling to get ahead of the other as the broad yellow stripe in the center indicates the finish line, and it is Tom McEwen the winner. From Fountain Valley, California, Tom McEwen advancing into the semifinals of the Big Bud Shootout. The Big Bud Shootout is being brought to you by Budweiser. For all you do, this Bud's for you. More first round shootout action in just a moment. Back at Indianapolis Raceway Park in the first round racing in the Big Bud Shootout. The dramatic burnout by Billy Meyer in the near lane with his competitor Frank Hawley right behind him and coming out of the cloud of smoke. 2 years ago, it was Frank Hawley winning the inaugural Big Bud Shootout. He is currently the reigning world champion and this year qualified #3. His competitor from Waco, Texas is Billy Meyer, and Billy qualified #7.
Billy, you've got an opponent first round in the Big Bud Shootout that's famous for his consistency, Frank Hawley.
Yeah, they've been real consistent all year. Over the last 3 years, have been quite consistent. I guess our main thing here is that the consistency that they have had is about 1/10 off of the pace we've been able to perform at this year, so hopefully it stays that way.
Billy Meyer's level of performance has been improving at practically every event this season. For Frank Hawley, his qualifying this year has been exceptionally good, thus his #3 spot here in the Big Bud Shootout, but the level of consistency has fallen off somewhat in NHRA national event competition. But that doesn't appear to be the case in this race. Frank Hawley stretching his lead over Billy Meyer by 2 car lengths at the finish line. 5.81 seconds his elapsed time. His speed a fine 250 miles an hour. Frank Hawley, the first ever winner of the Big Bud Shootout, advancing into the semifinals. This is the man all of drag racing was talking about last year. In the course of 3 short weeks, Kenny Bernstein won 3 major NHRA national event titles, including the Big Bud Shootout, and in the process garnered over $100,000 in cash, a never-before accomplished feat in the sport of championship drag racing. He had his problems qualifying for last year's Big Bud Shootout. That's not the case this year. Kenny Bernstein, as the defending champion, comes in a very strong #2 position. He is racing against Dale Paulding. Paulding qualified in the #7 spot, but bear in mind all 8 cars are very closely bunched in this field. Let's go down to Steve with Frank Hawley.
Frank Hawley, who tasted victory in the inaugural Big Bud Shootout 2 years ago, that's 1 down.
Well, we were concerned about Billy, and we always just try and take it 1 round at a time. I think the car run pretty well, and just like a couple years ago, I don't even know who run the next round.
Is the track good enough where you can keep the pedal down all the way, the full quarter mile?
That run we did, but we had softened it up. When we had qualified, the track was a little loose. I had to lift a bit, but it did run very well. That time we softened it up, and maybe we softened it a little too much, but
581.
Maybe that's a little too much. We'll find out. We'll watch the rest of the competition.
Okay, Frank. Going into the semifinals as Chi-Town Hustler.
A very personable Frank Hawley waiting for his crew to come take him back to the pits to prepare for the semifinals. Kenny Bernstein in the near lane, by virtue of his qualifying position, has the lane choice, and he selects the lane nearest the camera. Bernstein, based in Dallas, Texas, one of those famed Texas Thunder nitro-burning funny cars. His competition comes from Granada Hills, California. His name is Dale Palde.
Dale, if you would tell me about the racetrack. It is famous for its elapsed times. Is it in that kind of condition for the Big Bud Shootout?
I believe it will be. There's a bit of rain coming and going right now, so that's going to kind of mess up everybody's tune-up a little bit. And we've been doing a little bit of testing here, and we've had our share of troubles on the track, and I think it's going to be a hit-and-miss deal right off the bat for us.
Both drivers concentrating on the start. And Kenny Bernstein with a very slight advantage, but at the middle of the course, it appears Baldy coming on. At the finish line, it is Bernstein by just about a car length. 5.95-second elapsed time. His speed, 247 miles an hour. Picking him up at the middle of the race course, you see Kenny Bernstein just slowly start to pull ahead. Dale Palde in the far lane, making it a very close race. You see just how close. Only 0.02 of a second separating the two.
Kenny Bernstein's win streak continues in this Big Bud Shootout. 3 win lights last year in victory and 1 down now.
Well, that's the toughest one, Steve, the first round, and Dale Palde's a good competitor. I was plenty worried.
By 2 100ths you won it.
Is that right? I knew it was going to be close. We spun the tires quite a bit. She was pretty loose.
It's tougher this year, I think, than it was last year.
Well, yeah, I think so. Their cars are all good. They have been, but they're all running better this year, and they're all closer together, so it makes it tougher.
Okay, Kenny Bernstein, he goes into the semis.
The defending champion still in competition, maybe 2 years in a row. Bernstein paying recognition to the man he just defeated. Here's the man they're all talking about this year. This is the #1 qualifier. He is the man that everyone says is the car to beat. Mark Oswald driving for Candies and Hughes against the 3-time world champion, Raymond Beadle. Beadle has not had the most successful season of his career, while on the other hand, Mark Oswald has been ultimately successful both in qualifying, as is evidenced by his #1 spot, and in actual side-by-side competition. Driving for the team of Candies and Hughes, Mark Oswald, your favorite and #1 qualifier. For Raymond Beadle, the #5 qualifier, but obvious underdog, you have to wonder what his strategy is.
Our car, I think, can run equally as well. They've run quicker than we have. The best our cars ever runs have been low 70s, 71 or 72, but we think the car's capable of running in the 60s, and one thing about it, you know where you stand, so you got to go for it first round.
So you're willing to burn a motor if you have to get by him?
Yeah, well, hopefully we won't have to burn it, but I mean, if that's what it takes, that's what we'll do.
Raymond Beadle may be outclassed on paper, but never conceding an inch to the #1 qualifier, Mark Oswald. Don't forget, there's 2 important considerations in every race you're watching. The first and most important is winning the race. The secondary consideration is the elapsed time, because the racer with the lower elapsed time of the pair in the next round has the lane choice, gets to run in the preferred lane that he selects. So keep that in mind in every race. The elapsed time, very important to these racers. Mark Oswald in the near lane. In the far lane, Raymond Beadle. What a start for Beadle. Oswald goes up in smoke, and it is Beadle pulling ahead. A tremendous run for Beadle, and what an upset. The man they feared most down to defeat the Blue Max crew, congratulating each other. Look at the elapsed time, 5.75 seconds. Beadle slowing the Blue Max car to a stop as the shroud line flailing in the air. We watch again as Beadle and Oswald move almost together off the starting line, but then things go sour for Mark Oswald. The tires losing traction. The smoke you see, that means they're spinning. But for Raymond Beadle, he just pulls ahead to the finish line and wins the race.
Well, for Mark Oswald, who, as you heard earlier, many of the drivers had picked to go all the way here, is out in this first round of competition as Raymond Beadle steps up with a shocking 5.75 elapsed time. Mark Oswald trying to remove that carbon fiber helmet, and unfortunately we won't see him smile too much. No one expected that from Raymond.
Well, he ran good. I think we could have run good. The car just moved to the center line instantly off the starting line. I had to fight it back, and it was just all over the racetrack.
Well, good job, Mark.
Thanks anyway, see.
What a shock for Mark Oswald, and even Steve Evans at a loss for words as the racers head back to the pits to get ready for the semifinals. Raymond Beadle against Frank Hawley, Kenny Bernstein against Tom McEwen at Indianapolis Raceway Park, the Big Bud Shootout. The semifinal action of the Big Bud Shootout at Indianapolis Raceway Park. It was 2 years ago that Frank Hawley won the top prize of the shootout. This year, he is now in the semifinals, but is in an underdog role as he has to race the man that has established the lowest elapsed time in competition, Raymond Beadle, driving the Blue Max. That stunning 5.75 second elapsed time in the first round as he upset the favorite Mark Oswald gives Beadle the control. He has the lane choice in this race against Hawley, and that can be all important. The lanes of this quarter-mile racetrack can actually change throughout the day. Thus, the lane choice for the driver can be one of the most important considerations that he has to face. The other is mechanical problems. For Frank Hawley, he had very little between rounds. But for Raymond Beadle, a different story.
Raymond, the Blue Max was trailing some oil on the return road headed back to the pit area. Everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine. Everyone thought that maybe we'd hurt a rod or something. What happened, the chute didn't come out down there in the car. The track's a little rough on the other end. The car got to bouncing real bad. And we had one of the old oil pans on it, didn't have a patch, so we just kind of have a split here on the seam. But other than that, everything's fine.
So it ran 575 and didn't hurt a thing?
No, it didn't hurt anything. In fact, we think we can come back and run that good, maybe a little bit better.
Well, you're going to have to, because Frank Hawley was the second quickest car in that first round.
Yeah, well, when we went into this thing, we knew we didn't have lane choice first round. We were running the quickest car of the whole deal, and we were the quickest car of the event because he had run a 69. The best we'd have run was a 92. We knew the car ran pretty well yesterday. It broke a rocker arm. However, we did break another rocker arm on that 75 run, so we know we got a little bit left.
All the work is over, and it is now up to both drivers. Raymond Beadle in the Blue Max, Frank Hawley in the Chi-Town Hustler. The concentration level extremely high at this point. These drivers thinking about one thing only, getting a good start, getting the car off the starting line and down that racetrack as quick as possible. Raymond Beadle losing traction right off the start for Frank Hawley. Another great run. He crosses the finish line, and look at the elapsed time. 5.81 seconds. That consistency that you strive for is there. The happy crew reflecting the joy of the Chi-Town Hustler folks as they're in the finals. Look over in the far lane, the blue car. Raymond Beadle loses traction instantly off the starting line. Already, the crew for the Chi-Town Hustler is reacting as Frank Hawley heads to the finish line.
For the second time in 3 years, Frank Hawley goes into the final round of the Big Bud Shootout, 581.
Well, that's our game plan, isn't it? 82-81. I think that can do it. Might be an interesting story here if Kenny Bernstein wins this round, and you'll have your two previous winners in the final round.
Did you have to drive with a soft touch there, Frank, or hammer down?
No, I mean, we've been softening the car up a little bit like I guess you should, rather than rely on the driver. We just floored it. It rattled somewhat, shifted the car, and sailed across the finish line.
Let's go back to the starting line and see if indeed Kenny Bernstein will be your final round opponent.
Steve, back at the line, it's Tom McEwen that will be trying to prevent Kenny Bernstein from becoming the first ever two-time Big Bud Shootout champion. But McEwen's got to be thinking about one thing. He has the lane choice. He took the far lane, but he watched Raymond Beadle, the quickest car in competition today, go up in smoke right in front of him. Bernstein, on the other hand, watched Frank Hawley lay down a picture-perfect 5.81 second elapsed time. Tom McEwen in the far lane, the defending champion, Kenny Bernstein in the near lane, the winner to face Frank Hawley. A great start for both cars. It is McEwen beginning to pull ahead at the finish line by a car length. Tom McEwen wins the race and goes into the Big Bud Shootout finals against Frank Hawley. 5.84 seconds. The lane choice in the final will be Frank Hawley's, but this race going to Tom McEwen. This is an exact opposite of the race you just saw between Frank Hawley and Raymond Beadle. Tom McEwen not bothered at all about loss of traction. His main concern was getting to the finish line ahead of the defending champion, Kenny Bernstein. For the longtime veteran McEwen, a big win.
Dave, another round in the Big Bud Shootout where neither driver was sure if he'd won or lost. Tom McEwen, you won. You're in the final.
Thank you. You know what the time was?
584.
584. Not bad.
Not bad at all. You're looking sharp on the starting line.
Oh, man. Yeah, I left pretty good, I thought, that time. Well, you know, it's funny what money will do for guys.
Nice carrot out there, huh?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Tom McEwen and Frank Hawley.
The final set for the Big Bud Shootout, it is McEwen against Hawley, with Frank Hawley having lane choice. final of the Big Bud Shootout. $25,000 riding on this single race between two cars. In the near lane, it is Frank Hawley. He won this race 2 years ago. Tom McEwen in the far lane. The man that has been around the sport for over 2 decades, running better this year than ever before. Working his way into the finals from the number 8 qualifying position, just barely making the program. In fact, he was tied with Ed the Ace McCulloch for the number 8 spot, but by virtue of earning his points earlier, it was McEwen into the 8-car field rather than McCulloch. All the work is completed, all the effort of the crew finished. Now it rides solely on the driver. And it's Frank Hawley up in smoke, and look at McEwen go! $25,000 to Tom McEwen, 5.82 seconds, your Big Bud champion, and 260 miles an hour. Mr. Consistency, Frank Hawley, lost it all right here. The car losing traction, going up in smoke. He gives the win automatically to Tom McEwen. But on this run, McEwen thunders across that finish line at 260 miles an hour to become the Big Bud champion. And how important is a win like this? Just look at the disappointment on the face of Frank Hawley, the runner-up. Let's go to Steve with Tom McEwen.
Your crew did a marvelous job. At 260-mile-an-hour speeds, they are rarely seen.
Yeah, my crew is just great. I don't say about them. My help is good. My sponsors are great. You know, I'm driving pretty good for an old man this year. And, you know, what can I say? I'm real happy. And the Coors people, I'll tell you, I want to thank Budweiser for putting this race on and taking a chance that another beer company could rain on their parade. They're a class bunch. My hat's off to them. And, you know, you Budweiser people, buy the beer, and hats off to you.
And our congratulations to you, Tom McEwen, the Big Bud Shootout champion. The Big Bud Shootout was brought to you by Budweiser, the king of beers. Reach for that distinctively clean, crisp taste that says Budweiser. For all you do, this Bud's for you.